Hello class, welcome to another video from Professor Vern. At this point in the class, you are probably about to start your Canva ad, which is an ad for a post on your website. You will be creating either a Facebook or an Instagram type ad. And in this lesson, I'm going to help you better understand what I'm looking for in this assignment. There will also be a short quiz that accompanies this lecture and this PowerPoint. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a call to action or a CTA, and really the best way for me to explain what a CTA is just to show you. So you can see I have 4 ads up here, and they all have something in common. They all have a call to action. So you can see in the Marvel ad, there is a button at the bottom right corner that says download free. A call to action is essentially a marketer asking the consumer to do something. They are calling the consumer to take an action. And in this case, the action is to download something for free. In the Netflix ad, you can see that the call to action, there's an arrow pointing up to it, is watch free for 30 days. In the Pepsi ad, you can see the arrow pointing to the shop now. And then in the Urban Outfitters ad, what the company wants, what Urban Outfitters wants, is for the consumer to provide their email address. So the prompt is that they get 15% off if they provide their email address. So the idea of a call to action is to get the consumer to do something in the very near future, to take an action. You want to try to create urgency. You want to have your call to action stand out. You want to make sure it's simple for the consumer to understand. You want it to be persuasive. Watch free for 30 days, and you want it to be compelling. Get 15% off your next offer. The nice thing about digital advertising is it's entirely trackable. So, unlike, let's say, an ad on television, you don't really know if someone's watching it. But in this case, you can actually measure results by providing a CTA or a call to action. You can measure whether or not the action was taken. So what you're going to be doing is creating an ad that has a call to action. So what is a call to action? It's a prompt to take an action immediately. Marketers use call to actions to motivate consumers to place an order, to click through to a website, to read the details of an order offer, take advantage of a sale price, become a member. The list really is endless. It's whatever the marketer wants the consumer to do. So some other examples of CTAs, it could be something like learn now, get a free trial, shop now, join a mailing list, sign up, subscribe, download. So you're going to, for your ad, you're going to identify a call to action, and then you'll use Canva to design an ad that prompts the reader to do something. So when a marketer advertises, they're making an investment on the success of their company. And these things cost money. So if you want to run a paid ad on Facebook or Instagram, you're going to be investing money. So when you do that, you want to be sure that the ads that you're running are performing at a particular level, a level that brings your company to success. The thing is, that's one of the things that keeps marketers up at night because you don't know if your ad, even if you think it's successful, could it have been more successful? So the next thing we're going to talk about is ad design and something called A/B testing. It's sometimes called A/B split testing. So again, a basic marketing question is, are my ads working? And a solution is to do something called an A/B test, which is where you test 2 versions of the same ad. So you take an ad and you make a change in it, and you test whether the change results in a higher performance. So this concept of A/B testing, basically what you do is you split the audience into 2 groups, a control group and a test group. And if it's helpful, you can think of this like a science experiment with a control group and a test group. It basically follows the same principles. You create 2 versions of the same ad, but with one change. So one of the ads will have a change. Either the design has changed, maybe the colors have changed, and we're going to look at examples of that. The control group sees version A of the ad, and the test group sees version B of the ad. You run the ads, and then you compare the results to see which ad was more successful. And whichever ad was more successful, that's the one you go with. Now you may be wondering, how does this even happen? Well, on the advertising platforms for Facebook and Instagram, if you wanted to run an ad, you would create an ad, you would upload it to their advertising platform, you would pay whatever the amount is that they're asking for. But it also gives you an option to do an A/B test. So in that case, if you wanted to test two versions of the same ad, Facebook provides a way for you to provide ad A, version A and version B, and then they will ensure that those ads are seen by a split audience. So they will split the audience, and half of the audience gets one version and the other half gets the other version. So the best way to understand this is just to see it. So let's see some ads that could be used for A/B testing. So we're going to do an A/B offer test. We're going to look at an ad, and we're going to have one version of the ad. The product is at $10, and the test is to see if a reduction in price to $9.99 makes a difference. So in the control version of the ad, we have something called the coffee package, where you can get coffee and a donut, and it's only $10 for the two. Then there's a call to action that says hungry, click here now. So you can see the blue arrow is pointing to the only $10. In the test version, or version B, we're going to test that price point. So you can see it's the same exact ad, but in this case, the price is reduced. So this is an example of an A/B test where we are testing the price point. Everything else in the ad stays the same. So let's keep going and see how else we can use an A/B test. So here's another example. We're going to do an A/B call to action test where we change the wording in the call to action. So here's our control, which you saw on the previous page. Coffee package, coffee and donut, only $10. Hungry, click here now. That's the control, or version A. But I'm going to test that against a more simplified call to action. Just click here. So in this case, I'm testing the wording in the CTA. I want to see which version of the ad receives more responses. I've left everything else the same, and that's really important. When you're doing an A/B test, you can only test one element at a time. If I'd also changed the price point here, and I had one ad outperform the other, I wouldn't know if it was from the price point or a change in the call to action. So let's look at one more. In this case, we're going to change the headline. So now we're doing an A/B test where we change the headline. And instead of saying just coffee, we're going to call it breakfast. So version A has a coffee package, coffee and donut, only $10. Click here. And version B says breakfast package, coffee and donut, only $10. Click here. So in this test, I'm testing the headline. So you can test anything you want in an ad, but when you do the test, you only want to make one change. So let's talk about A/B testing tips and understand what KPIs are. So as I just mentioned, we only want to test one element at a time. The next thing is we want to make sure the control and the test group are randomized samples. So if you haven't yet taken a statistics course, which is required by marketing students and typically business students, you do have to understand that you must control for a sample in a test. That's very similar to doing a science experiment. You don't want two totally different groups. You want those groups to be random so that each group represents the whole. So in our example here, I wouldn't set up a test where the control ad ran at 8 in the morning and the test ad ran at 7 at night. I'm going to get two different groups of people. I would not consider those randomized. The time effect could result in skewed results. So you want to control for the randomization of the samples between the control and the test group. So these are some tips if you were actually creating an A/B test. You want to make sure the responses are trackable, measurable, and linked to a performance indicator. The word for a performance indicator is a KPI, that stands for Key Performance Indicator. You need to do that so a decision can be made. So what companies do is they have different statistics that they use to study their business. And I'll try to make this very straightforward by thinking about a college. So we're all familiar with a college. WCC tracks KPIs or key performance indicators to determine how successful the college is performing based on its mission. One of the very first KPIs that we look at, or key performance indicator, is the number of applications received from students. So if that number drops, we know we might have a tougher year because fewer students will end up in our classes. So a KPI for WCC would be the number of applications received. It's totally trackable and measurable, and it's an important statistic that helps us understand what the school year will look like for the college. We then look at another KPI, how many students enrolled from those applications. We then look at another KPI, a couple months later, we'll look at how many students passed the first semester. These KPIs or key performance indicators help us understand the business that we're in, which is education, and if we're headed in the right direction. For a for-profit company, they may look at other things. So a KPI or a key performance indicator is a number or statistics a company tracks that is linked to the company's success. It could be sales. That's easy, right? How much money did we make? How many consumers did this ad bring in versus the other ad? Did our sales increase? And which ad brought us the most amount of sales? So sales can be considered a KPI. Your website traffic. Which ad drove the most amount of traffic to the website? Click rates, how many people clicked on that CTA? Email open rates. What you have to do is understand your business and identify what the KPIs are for your business. So you need those KPIs because you want to actually compare version A versus version B in numbers so that a decision can be made on what to do going forward. So let's put this into numbers, and let's use the very first example where I had the donut ad, donut and coffee ad at $10 versus $9.99. So I've got a little chart here with fictitious numbers, but let's assume these were the real results, the actual results from running an ad, two ads, control ad to 50,000 people and a test ad to 50,000 people. And we know that the test ad, there was a reduction in the price from $10 to $9.99. So potentially cheaper and more favorable to the audience. So let's assume that these were the response rates. Out of 50,000 people, 500 responded to the control ad or the A version. That results in a 1% response. And in the test version where the price dropped, in this scenario, purchases went up. We had 600 purchases. That is the equivalent of a 1.2% response rate. So the response rate is the percent of people who took an action. In this case, the action was to purchase the coffee. So it's very important to marketers to understand how control A did versus test B. And that's where we look at the percent change. So if you had a base response rate of 1% and the test ad resulted in a response rate of 1.2%, that would be considered a 20% lift or a 20% change. Another way marketers might say it is that test B either outperformed control A or test B pulled better than control A. So the percent change is an important concept to understand. So I wrote the equation out down on the bottom here. So how do I calculate that 20%? I take 1.2, that's the results from test B. I subtract it from control A or 1%, and I divide it by the base, which was the control, and that results in a 20% lift, a 20% lift. The purchases, obviously, it's all based on the same percentages. 500 to 600 purchases, that's a 20% lift as well. But here's why we always want to analyze the numbers, because we did get a lift, but we lowered the price. So now we have to see how that lower price impacted our total sales. Now in this case, the percent lift was high enough to cover the lost penny for each purchase. So the control version resulted in $5,000 and the test version resulted in $5,994. So I can say with confidence now that test B at a lower price point outperformed the control and resulted in a lift in sales or your change in sales of 19.9%. That would be a successful test. Now, it's important to look at the numbers because I've made up this scenario, but the end results could be different. So let's look at the results should the numbers have not been exactly what we see on this slide. So here we have KPIs and the results, and we are comparing control A versus the test, which is B. And in this case, you can see where I put in the red box, the response rate for the test version stayed the same as the control. So 50,000 people saw A, 50,000 people saw B, and in both scenarios, the response rate was the same. There's no percent change or 0% change. As a result, the purchases were the same. 500 people purchased from the control ad, 500 people from the test ad, a 0% change. But because we lowered the price, which would be a drop in performance of 0.1%, we actually ended up with lower sales. And this is why it's important to test. So obviously, if this was the actual results, I'd want to quickly pull down the test version because it's losing us money. So important to take the results of a control versus a test or an A/B split, and take those numbers, identify what your KPIs are, in this case it's total sales, and work out the actual result of what happened when the ad ran. So other terms to know from this lesson, a response rate is the percent of people who took an action. In this case, it was the percent of people who clicked and purchased the coffee. The percent change could be an increase or decrease in comparing test A to test B. A lift is a reference to the percent change. So you heard how I used the word lift. So in the first scenario, test B had a 20% lift over the control A. And another way to say that is pulled. Test B in the first scenario pulled higher than control A. So understanding the terminology is very important. So I hope that it helps you understand what a call to action is, what a KPI is, and what an A/B split test is. And I hope the visual helps you with your assignment. So good luck. Make sure you submit the assignment on time, and please take the associated quiz with this lecture. Good luck.